Ancient Egyptian Legends by M.A. Murray, first edition, published January 1913, London. A link to this public domain work is in the description. If you like this kind of stuff, like and subscribe to the channel. You know you'll get more. Let's begin with the first tale. The Princess and the Demon. It was in the reign of King Ramesses, son of the sun, beloved of Amun, king of the gods. A mighty warrior was Ramesses in the day of the battle to Mentu, god of war. Very valorous was he, like the son of the sky goddess. Now, his majesty was in Naharena, where the great river Euphrates rolls down to the sea, and he received the tribute of vassal princes, for he was the conqueror of the 9 archer tribes, and none could stand before his face when he came forth equipped with all his weapons of war. The princes prostrated themselves before him, bowing their foreheads to the ground, breathing the earth which his feet had trodden. Great and splendid was their tribute, gold and precious stones of all colors, blue lapis lazuli and green turquoise, sacred to Hathor, goddess of love and joy. And slaves came, bearing on their backs sweet-scented woods, perfumed and aromatic, like the trees in the land of the gods. The prince of Bekten came also, and with him his eldest daughter, and he placed her in front of the slaves, for she was the choicest part of his tribute. Very beautiful was she, fair in her limbs, tall and slender as a palm tree, and the heart of the king turned to her with delight, and he loved her more than anything on earth. He made her the great royal wife, and he gave her a name by which she should be known in the land of Egypt, Neferu Ra. The beauty of Ra she was called, for her beauty was like the shining of the sun, and the name was written in the royal oval, as is the custom of the kings of Egypt and their queens. Then King Ramesses returned to Egypt, and with him went the great royal wife, Queen Neferu Ra. And when they came to the Black Land, the land of Egypt, she performed all the ceremonies of a queen in the temples of Egypt. Now it happened that King Ramesses was in Thebes, the mighty one, on the 22nd of the month Paini. And he went into the temple of Ammon, for this day of so beautiful the festival of the god, when the boats go up and down the water with torches and lights, and the sacred bark, adorned with gold and painted with glorious colors, is borne aloft, that men may see the figure of Amun-Ra himself within. And Queen Neferu-Ra with his majesty, for the great royal wife of Egypt, has ever been the worshipper of Amun-Ra, the king of the gods. There came into the temple courtiers of the king to announce the arrival of a messenger from the prince of Bekten. Loaded was he with the gifts for Neferu-Ra, the queen of Egypt, daughter of the prince of Bekten, and he carried also a message to the king. When he entered the royal presence, he bowed to the earth, saying, "Glory to thee, O son of the 9 archer tribes. May we live before thee." Then he bowed to the earth again and again, and spoke the message that he had brought from the prince of Bekten to Ramesses, king of Egypt. I come to thee, O living king, my lord, on account of Bent Reshi, the little sister of the great royal wife Neferura, for there is a malady in all her limbs. Send, therefore, a learned man that he may see and heal her. The king turned to his courtiers and said, Bring hither a scribe of the house of life, and bring also those who speak the hidden things of the inner chamber. And the courtiers hastened and brought them into the presence forthwith. And the king said to them, I have brought you hither to hear this manner. Tell me then of a man, learned and skilful, to send to the prince of Bekten. Then they took counsel among themselves as to a learned and skilful man, and they brought the scribe Tehuti Heb before the king. And the king bade him go with the messenger of the prince of Bekten to heal Bent Reshi, the little sister of the great royal wife. When the scribe Tehuti Heb came to Bekten, he was brought into the presence of Bent Reshi. He was a learned and skilful man, and he found the princess under the dominion of a spirit that was hostile to him, against whom his learning and skill were of no avail, who set his magic arts at naught. But then the prince of Bekten was sad, and sorrow was in his heart. But Tehuti Heb the scribe counselled him to send again to Egypt to implore the help of Khonsu, the expeller of demons, to cast out the evil spirit from Bent Reshi, the little sister of the great royal wife. Now, so great was the distance from Bekten to Egypt, that from the time that Tehuti Heb and the scribe departed out to Thebes till the second message came to King Ramesses was 3 years. And throughout that time the evil spirit dwelt in the body of Bent Reshi and would not be cast out. And when the second messenger arrived, King Ramesses was again in Thebes, and it was the first of the month Pacons, the month that is sacred to Khonsu. He entered the temple, and with him came his courtiers, and the messenger of the prince Bekten. In the temple were 2 statues of Khonsu. Very marvelous figures were these, very sacred, very holy. The one was called Khonsu in Thebes Neferhotep, and the other Khonsu, the expeller of demons. Now Khonsu is the god of the moon, the son of Amun-Ra and of Mut, lady of Ashru, and men represent him with the curled lock of youth, for he is ever young and ever beautiful. Then the king stood before the great statue of Khonsu in Thebes Neferhotep, and said, O my good lord, I come again into thy presence on account of the daughter of the prince of Bekten. Then the priests lifted the statue of Khonsu in Thebes Neferhotep and placed it in front of Khonsu, the expeller of demons. And the king spoke again before Khonsu in Thebes Neferhotep and said, My good lord, turn thy face to Khonsu, the expeller of demons. Grant that he may go to Bekten. Khonsu in Thebes Neferhotep inclined his head twice in token of assent. Very marvelous was the figure of Khonsu in Thebes Neferhotep. And yet again King Ramesses spoke, Let thy protection be with him. Grant that I may send the majesty of Khonsu to Bekten to save Bent Reshi, the little sister of the great royal wife. Khonsu in Thebes Neferhotep inclined his head twice in token of assent. Very marvelous was the figure of Khonsu in Thebes Neferhotep, and he gave his magical protection 4 times to Khonsu the expeller of demons. Then King Barnases gave command, and Khonsu, the expeller of demons, was placed in the great boat, and around the great boat were 5 small boats, with chariots and horses, numerous and splendid on the right hand and on the left. The retinue of Khonsu, expeller of demons, was the retinue of a king. For a year and 5 months they journeyed, until they finally reached Bekten. The Prince of Bekten came out with his bowmen and his courtiers to meet Khonsu, the expeller of demons, with this royal welcome, and they entered into his presence as into the presence of a king. The Prince of Bekten fell on his knees and laid his forehead on the ground at the feet of Khonsu, and said, "Thou hast come to us. O be kind to us according to the words of Rameses, the king of Egypt." They brought Khonsu to the chamber of Bent-Reshi, the little sister of the great royal wife, and he made a magical protection over her. Lo, there happened a wonder and a marvel, for she was well in all but a moment. Then the spirit who had been in her spoke in the presence of Khonsu, the expeller of demons. "Thou hast come in peace, O great God, expeller of demons. Bekten is thy city, its people are thy slaves. I bow before thee, for I am also thy slave. I will go to that place from which I came, that thy heart may have peace. But ere I go, let the majesty of Khonsu give command that a holy day be made for me by the Prince of Bekten." When he said these words, Khonsu, the expeller of demons, inclined his head to the priest and said, "Let the Prince of Bekten make a great sacrifice for this spirit." The Prince of Bekten and all his soldiers and courtiers heard the voices of the spirit and of the god, and they trembled. They were exceedingly afraid. They obeyed the command of the god and prepared a great sacrifice for Khonsu, the expeller of demons, and for the spirit that came out of Bent-Reshi, the little sister of the royal wife, the daughter of the Prince of Bekten. And they made a holy day with offerings, sacrifices, and libations. So the spirit in the form of a shining one went his way in peace out of the land of Bekten, and he went whithersoever it pleased him, as Khonsu, the expeller of demons, had commanded. The Prince of Bekten was glad, and his heart rejoiced, and all the people rejoiced also that the spirit had been driven out of Bent-Reshi and out of the land of Bekten. But in the midst of his joy and gladness, fear came upon the heart of the Prince of Bekten, lest the spirit should return and take up his abode again in the land when Khonsu, the expeller of demons, had departed. He took counsel with himself and said, "I will keep Khonsu, the expeller of demons, in Bekten. I will not let him return to Egypt." And so Khonsu remained for 3 years, 4 months, and 5 days in Bekten, but the Prince of Bekten would not let him go. And at the end of the time that the Prince of Bekten lay upon his bed at night and slept, and while he slept a vision passed before his eyes. He dreamed that he stood before the shrine of Khonsu. The great doors of the shrine were folded, and the god came forth. Stepping out between the doors, he changed into the form of a hawk with feathers of gold, burnished and beautiful, and soared high into the air with wings outspread, and like an arrow he darted towards Egypt. When the Prince of Bekten awoke, he was afraid, for he feared the wrath of the gods, and he sent for the priest of Khonsu, the expeller of demons, and said to him, "The god is estranged from us. He has returned to Egypt. Let his chariot also return to Egypt." The Prince of Bekten gave command that the god should be taken back, and he loaded the god with gifts. Great and numerous were the gifts of all manner of beautiful things that the Prince of Bekten gave to Khonsu. For many months they journeyed, and with them an escort of soldiers and horses from the land of Bekten. They arrived safely at Thebes, and entered into the temple of Khonsu in Thebes Neferhotep. Then Khonsu, the expeller of demons, gave Khonsu in Thebes Neferhotep all the gifts, the rich and costly, which he had received from the Prince of Bekten. Nothing did he keep for himself. And thus ended the journey of Khonsu, the expeller of demons, the great god. The King's Dream. Long, long ago lived Thothmes, king of Egypt. Lord of the two lands was he, wearer of the double diadem, he whom the gods loved. But he was not that Thothmes, the mighty bull who conquered Syria, Nubia, and the 9 archer tribes, but he bore the same name, and was a great and valorous king. Syria bowed before him. Nubia was his servant, and he trod the 9 archer tribes beneath his feet. When he was a child, he was like unto Harpocrates, the son of Isis, he who was born in the marshes of the north country. Beautiful was he, with the beauty of the gods, in form like Horus, the avenger of his father. And in all manly sports he did excel. He hunted the wild game on the deserts both north and south of Memphis. He coursed the lions and the deer. He shot arrows at targets. He drove in his chariot, and his horses were fleeter than the wind. Alone did he hunt, or with 2 companions only, and none knew the path that he would follow. For in the desert none live save wild beasts. When his followers required rest in the heat of the day, he took them to the great statue of Harmachis, close to Ker Aha, where the road of the god leads eastward to On. Of stone was this mighty figure, hewn out of living rock, his face the face of a man, stern and majestic, turned to the rising sun, his body that of a lion. Upon his brow is the death-dealing snake with head erect, ready to strike. Men call this figure Harmachis, and the Sphinx, and the father of terrors. Great and exalted is this figure of the god, resting in his chosen place. Mighty is his power, for the shadow of the sun is upon him. The temples of Memphis and the temples of every town on both sides adore him. They stretch out their hands to him in adoration, Sacrifices and libations are made before him. One day, here, Thothmes was not yet king. Before he had ascended the throne of Horus, the living one, it came to pass that he hunted alone in the desert, and it was noontide. Very fierce was the heat, blinding the sunbeams, and he rested in the shadow of the great god. And as he rested, heated and weary, in the coolness of the shadow, sleep very heavy and deep came upon him in the moment when the sun reached the zenith. Thus he slept at broad midday, and in his sleep dreams and visions came upon him. In his dream he stood before the giant figure of God, but no longer was it of stone, for behold, it was the God himself. The breath of life was in him, and his lips moved, and he spoke with gentle speech as a father speaks to a child, for his words were of blessing. See now, O my son Thothmes, he said, look at me, behold me. I am thy father. I am Harmachis, and Ra, and Khepra, and Atmu also. For I am the sun god, to whom all lands are subject. Through me alone shall the kingdom of Egypt come to thee. Thou shalt wear the white crown of the south land, and the red crown of the north land. Thou shalt sit upon the throne of Geb the inheritor. To thee shall belong the whole land in its length and breadth, the land which the universal Lord makes glorious. Want and trouble shall never come near thee, for gifts shall be brought to thee from every country, near and afar. The duration of thy life shall be for many years. My face shall be towards thee, and my heart shall incline to thee, if thou wilt do for me that which I desire. And Thothmes looked, and he saw that the figure lay half buried in the sand, and it seemed as though the god had struggled to free himself, for naught but the head appeared above the plain, and the sands came up about him, like the waves of the sea when they swallow up a ship that is on the rocks. Then the majesty of the god spoke once more, and he said, the sand of the desert on which I rest is about me. It overwhelms me. It covers me. Hasten to do that which my heart desires, for I know thou art a son who honors the behests of his father. Sleep fell from the eyelids of Thothmes, and he awoke. Here the inscription is broken away, and the end of the story is not known. The coming of the great queen. Now Amun-Ra, king of the gods, sat upon his throne, and around him stood the greatest of the gods and goddesses. On his right was Osiris, crowned with the great white crown of the south land, and on his left was Mentu, the god of war. On the head of Mentu were two great feathers, and the flashing disk of the sun. With Osiris were the twin goddesses, Isis and Nephthys. Beside them stood Hathor, goddess of love, whom the Greeks call Aphrodite. Horus, the son of Iris, Isis, with far-seeing eyes of the hawk, and Anubis, the son of Nephthys, the faithful guardian of Isis. With Mentu were Atmu, the god of the sunset, Shu and his twin sister Tefnut, Geb the earth god, and Nut the sky goddess. These two are the oldest of the gods, from whom all others proceed. Amun-Ra, king of the gods, sat upon his throne and looked upon the land of Egypt. And he spoke, saying, I will create a queen to rule over Ta-Meri. I will unite the two lands in peace for her, and in her hands I will place the whole world. Egypt, Syria, Nubia, Punt, the land of the gods, shall be under her sway. And when he had spoken this, there was a silence among the gods. While he yet spoke, Thoth entered into his presence. Thoth, the twice great, the maker of magic, the lord of Kemenu. He listened to the words of Amun-Ra, king of the gods, and in the silence that followed, he spoke. O Amun-Ra, lord of the thrones of the two lands, king of the gods, maker of men, behold, in the black land, in the palace of the king is a maiden. Fair and beautiful is she in all her limbs. Ahmes is her name, and she is the wife to the king of Egypt. She alone can be the mother of the great queen, whom thou wilt create over to rule the two lands. She is in the palace of the king. Come, let us go to her. Now the form of Thoth is the form of an ibis, that he may fly swiftly through the air, and none may know him. And as an ibis he went to the palace of the king. But Amun-Ra took upon himself the shape of the king of Egypt. Great was the majesty of Amun-Ra, splendid his adornments. On his neck was the glittering collar of gold and precious stones. On his arms were bracelets of pure gold and electrum. And on his head were two plumes. By the plumes alone could men know the king of the gods. In one hand he carried the scepter of power, in the other the emblem of life. Glorious was he as the sun at midday, and the perfumes of the land of Punt were all around him. In the palace of the king of Egypt was Queen Ahmes, and it was night. She lay upon her couch, and sleep was upon her eyelids. Like a jewel was she in her beauty, and the chamber in which she slept was like the setting of a jewel, black bronze and electrum, acacia wood and ebony were the adornments of the palace, and her couch was in the form of a fierce lion. Through the two great doors of the palace went the gods. None saw them, none beheld them, and with them came Neith, the god of Sais, and Silk, the scorpion goddess. On the head of Neith were the shield and crossed arrows, on the head of Silk a scorpion bearing in each claw the emblem of life. The fragrance of the perfumes of Punt filled the chamber, and Queen Ahmes awoke and beheld Amun-Ra, the king of the gods, maker of men. In majesty and beauty he appeared before her, and her heart was filled with joy. He held towards her the sign of life, and in her hand he laid the sign of life and the scepter of power. And Neith and Silk lifted the couch on which the queen reposed, and held it high in the air, that she might be raised above the ground on which mortal men live, while she spoke with the immortal gods. Then Amun-Ra returned, and was enthroned among the gods, and he summoned to his presence Khnum the Creator, he who fashions the bodies of men, who dwells beside the rushing waters of the cataract. To Khnum he gave the command, O Khnum, fashioner of the bodies of men, fashion for me a daughter, she who shall be the great queen of Egypt. For I will give to her all life and satisfaction, all stability, and all joy of heart forever. Khnum the Creator, the fashioner of the bodies of men, the dweller by the cataract, made answer to Amun-Ra, I will form for thee thy daughter, and her form shall be more glorious than the gods, for the greatness of her dignity as king of the south and the north. Then he brought his potter's wheel, and took clay, and with his hands fashioned the body of the daughter of Queen Ahmes into the body of her Ka. And the body of the child and the body of the Ka were alike in their limbs and faces, and none but the gods could know them apart. Beauty were they with the beauty of Amun-Ra, more glorious were they than the gods. Beside the potter's wheel knelt Heqt, lady of Herur, the goddess of birth. In each hand she held the sign of life, and as the wheel turned and the bodies were fashioned, she held it towards them, that life might enter into the lifeless clay. Then Khnum, the fashioner of the bodies of men, and Heqt, the goddess of birth, came to the palace of the king of Egypt, and with them came Isis, the great mother, and her sister Nephthys, Meshkent, and also Ta-Urt, and Bes, the protector of children. The spirits of Pe and the spirits of Dep came with them to greet the daughter of Amun-Ra and of Queen Ahmes. When the child appeared, the goddesses rejoiced, and the spirits of Pe and the spirits of Dep chanted praises to her honor, for the daughter of Amun-Ra was to sit upon the throne of Horus of the living, and rule the land of Egypt, to the glory of the gods. She was called Hatshepsut, chief of noble women, divine of diadems, favorite of the goddess, beloved of Amun-Ra. And to her the gods granted that she should be the mistress of all lands within the circuit of the sun, and that she should appear as a king upon the throne of Horus, before the glories of the great house. And upon her was the favor of Amun-Ra forever. The Book of Thoth. Now Ahura was the wife of Nefer-ka-Ptah, and their child was Merab. This was the name by which he was registered by the scribes in the House of Life. And Nefer-ka-Ptah, though he was the son of the king, cared for naught on earth but to read the ancient records written on papyrus in the House of Life, or engraved on stone in the temples. All day and every day he studied the writings of the ancestors. One day he went into the temple to pray to the gods, but when he saw the inscriptions on the walls he began to read them, and forgot to pray. He forgot the gods, he forgot the priests, he forgot all that was around him, until he heard laughter behind him. He looked round, and a priest stood there, and from him came the laughter. "Why laughest thou at me?" said Nefer-ka-Ptah. "Because thou readest these wordless writings," answered the priest. "If thou wouldst read these writings that are worth the reading, I can tell thee where the Book of Thoth lies hidden. Then Neferkata was eager in his questions, and the priest replied, Thoth wrote the book with his own hand, and in all its magic in the world. If thou readest the first page, thou wilt enchant the sky, the earth, the abyss, mountains, and sea. You will understand the language of the birds of the air, and know what the creeping things of the earth are saying. You will see the fishes from the darkest depths of the sea. And if thou readest the other page, even though thou wert dead and in the world of ghosts, thou could come back to the earth in the form thou once had. And beside this, thou wilt see the sun shining in the sky with the full moon and stars, and thou wilt behold the great shapes of the gods. Then said Neferkata, By the life of the Pharaoh, the book shall be mine. Tell me whatsoever it is that thou desirest, and I will do it. Provide for my funeral, said the priest. See that I am buried as a rich man, with priests and mourning women, offerings, libations, and incense. Then shall my soul rest in peace in the fields of Alu. 100 pieces of silver must be spent upon my burying. Then Neferkata sent a fleet messenger to fetch the money, and he paid 100 pieces of silver into the priest's hands. When the priest had taken the silver, he said to Neferkata, The book is in Coptos, in the middle of the river. In the middle of the river is an iron box. In the iron box is a bronze box. In the bronze box is a Kete wood box. In the Kete wood box is an iron and ebony box. In the ivory and ebony box is a silver box. In the silver box is a gold box, and in the gold box is the Book of Thoth. Round about the greatest iron box are snakes and scorpions, and all manner of crawling things. And above all there is a snake which no man can kill. These are set to guard the Book of Thoth. When the priest had finished speaking, Neferkata ran out of the temple, for his joy was so great, he knew not where he was. He ran quickly to find Ahura and tell her about the book, that he would go to Coptos and find it. But Ahura was very sorrowful, and said, Go not on this journey, for trouble and grief await thee in the southern land. She laid her hand upon Neferkata, as though she would hold him back from the sorrow that awaited him, but he would not be restrained, and he broke away from her and went to the king his father. He told the king all he had learned, and said, Give me the royal barge, father, that I may go to the southern land with my wife Ahura and my son Merab, for the Book of Thoth I must and will have. So the king gave the orders, and the royal barge was prepared, and in it Neferkata, Ahura, and Merab sailed up the river to the southern land as far as Coptos. When they arrived at Coptos, the high priest and all the priests of Isis of Coptos came down to the river to welcome Neferkata, Ahura, and Merab. And they went in a great procession to the temple of the goddess, and Neferkata sacrificed an ox and a goose, and poured a libation of wine to Isis of Coptos and her son Harpocrates. After this, the priests of Isis and their wives made a great feast for 4 days in the honor of Neferkata and Ahura. On the morning of the 5th day, Neferkata called to him a priest of Isis, a great magician learned in all the mysteries of the gods. And together they made a little magic box, like the cabin of the boat, and they made men and a great store of tackle, and put the men and the tackle in the magic cabin. Then they uttered a spell over it, and the men breathed and were alive, and began to use the tackle. And Neferkata sank the magic cabin in the river, saying, "Workmen, workmen, work for me." And he filled the royal barge with sand and sailed away alone. While Ahura sat on the bank of the river at Coptos and watched and waited, she knew that sorrow must come for this journey to the southern land. The magic men in the magic cabin toiled all night and all day for 3 nights and 3 days along the bottom of the river. And when they stopped, the royal barge stopped also. Neferkata knew that he had arrived where the book lay hidden. He took the sand out of the royal barge and threw it into the water, and it made a gap in the river, a gap of showness long and showness wide. In the middle of the gap lay the iron box, and beside the box was coiled a great snake that no man could kill. And all around the box, on every side to the edge of the walls of water, were snakes and scorpions, and all manner of crawling thing. Then Neferkata stood up in the royal barge, and across the water he cried to the snakes and scorpions and crawling things a great and terrible cry, and the words were the words of magic. As soon as his voice was still, the snakes and scorpions and crawling things were still also, for they were enchanted by the means of the magical words of Neferkata, and they could not move. Neferkata brought the royal barge to the edge of the gap, and he walked through the snakes and scorpions and crawling things, and they looked at him, but could not move because of the spell that was upon them. And now Neferkata was face to face with the snake that no man could kill, and it reared itself up ready for battle. Neferkata rushed upon it and cut off its head, and at once the head and the body came together, each to each, and the snake that no man could kill was alive again, ready for the fray. Again Neferkata rushed upon it, and so hard did he strike, the head was flung far from the body. But at once the head and the body came together again, each to each, and again the snake that no man could kill was alive and ready to fight. Then Neferkata saw that the snake was immortal and could not be slain. It must be overcome by subtle means. Again he rushed upon it and cut it in two, and very quickly he put sand on each part, so that, when the head and the body came together, there was sand between them, and they could not join. And the snake that no man could kill finally lay helpless before him. Then Neferkata went to the great box where it stood in the gap in the middle of the river, and the snakes and scorpions and all the crawling things watched, but they could not stop him. He opened the iron box and found a bronze box. He opened the bronze box and found a Kete wood box. He opened the Kete wood box and found an ivory and ebony box. He opened the ivory and ebony box and found a silver box. He opened the silver box and found a gold box. he opened the gold box, and he found the Book of Thoth. He opened the book and read a page, and at once he had enchanted the sky, earth, abyss, mountains, and the sea, and he understood the language of birds, fish, and beasts. He read the second page, and he saw the sun shining in the sky with a full moon and stars, and he saw the great shapes of the gods themselves, and so strong was the magic that fishes came up from the darkest depths of the sea. So he knew what the priest had told him was true. Then he thought of Ahura waiting for him at Koptos, and he cast a magic spell upon the men that he made, saying, "Workmen, workmen, work for me, and take me back to the place from which I came." They toiled day and night, until they came to Koptos, and there was Ahura sitting by the river, having eaten nothing and drunk nothing, since Neferkata went away, for she sat waiting and watching for the sorrow that was to come upon them. But when she saw Neferkata returning in the royal barge, her heart was glad, and she rejoiced exceedingly. Neferkata came to her and put the Book of Thoth into her hands, and bade her to read it. When she read the first page, she enchanted the sky, the earth, the abyss, the mountains, and the sea, and she understood the language of the birds, fish, and beasts. And when she read the second page, she saw the sun shining in the sky, with a full moon and stars, and she saw the great shapes of the gods themselves, and so strong was the magic that the fishes came up from the darkest depths of the sea. Neferkata now called for a piece of new papyrus, and for a cup of beer, and on the papyrus he wrote all the spells that were in the Book of Thoth. Then he took the cup of beer and washed the papyrus in the beer, so that all the ink was washed off, and the papyrus had become as though it had never been written on. And Neferkata drank the beer, and at once he knew all the spells that had been written on the papyrus, for this is the method of the great magicians. Then Neferkata and Ahura went to the temple of Isis and gave offerings to Isis and Harpocrates, and they made a great feast. And the next day they went on board the royal barge and sailed joyfully down the river towards the northern land. But, behold, Thoth had discovered the loss of his book, and Thoth raged like a panther of the south, and he hastened before Ra and told him all, saying to him, "Neferkata has found my magic box and opened it. He has stolen my book. Even the Book of Thoth. He slew the guards that surrounded it, and the snake that no man can kill lay helpless before him. Avenge me, Ra, upon Neferkata, the son of the king of Egypt." The majesty of Ra answered, "Take him and his wife and child, and do with them as thou wilt." And now the sorrow for which Ahura watched and waited was about to come upon them. For Thoth took with him a power from Ra to give him his desire upon the stealer of his book. As the royal barge sailed smoothly down the river, the little boy Merab ran out from the shade of the awning and leaned over the side watching the water. And the power of Ra drew him, so that he fell into the river and was drowned. When he fell, all the sailors on the royal barge and all the people walking on the river bank raised a great cry, but they could not save him. Neferktar came out to the cabin and read a magical spell over the water, and the body of Merab came to the surface, and they brought it on board the royal barge. Then Neferktar read another spell, and so great was its power that the dead one spoke and told Neferktar that all had happened among the gods, that Thoth was seeking vengeance, and that Ra granted him his desire upon the stealer of this book. Neferktar gave command, and the royal barge returned to Coptus, that Merab may be buried there with honor due to the son of a prince. When the funeral ceremonies were over, the royal barge sailed down the river towards the northern land. A joyful journey was it, no longer. Merab was dead, and Ahura's heart was heavy on account of the sorrow that was still to come, for the vengeance of Thoth was not yet fulfilled. They reached the place where Merab had fallen into the water, and Ahura came out from under the shade of the awning, and she leaned over the side of the barge, and the power of Ra drew her, so that she fell into the river and drowned. When she fell, all the sailors in the royal barge, and all the people walking on the river bank raised a great cry, but they could not save her. Neferktar came out of the cabin, read a magic spell over the water, and the body of Ahura came to the surface. Then Neferktar read another spell, and so great was its power that the dead one spoke and told Neferktar all that had happened among the gods, and that Thoth was still seeking vengeance, and that Ra had granted him his desire upon the stealer of his book. Neferktar gave command, and the royal barge returned to Coptus, that Ahura might be buried there with the honor due to the daughter of a king. When the funeral ceremonies were over, the royal barge sailed down the river toward the northern land. A sorrowful journey, for Ahura and Merab were dead, and the vengeance of Thoth was not yet fulfilled. They reached the place where Ahura and Merab had fallen into the water, and Neferktar felt the power of Ra drawing him. Though he struggled against it, he knew it would conquer him. He took a piece of royal linen, fine and strong, made it into a girdle, and with it he bound the Book of Thoth firmly to his breast, for he was resolved that Thoth should never have his book again. Then the power drew him yet more strongly, and when he came from under the shade of the awning and threw himself into the river and was drowned. When he fell, all the sailors of the royal barge and all the people walking on the river bank raised a great cry, but once again they could not save him. And when they looked for his body, they could not find it. So the royal barge sailed down the river till they reached the northern land and came to Memphis. And the chiefs of the royal barge went to the king and told him all that had happened. The king put on the mourning raiment. He and his courtiers, the high priest of all the priests of Memphis, the king's army, the king's household, were clothed in mourning apparel, and they had walked in procession to the haven of Memphis to the royal barge. When they came to the haven, they saw the body of Neferktar, floating in the water besides the barge, close to the great steering oars. And this marvel came to pass because of the magical powers of Nefer-Ktar. Even in death, he was a great magician, by reason of the spells he had washed off the papyrus and drunk in the beer. Then they drew him out of the water, and they saw the Book of Thoth bound to him with a girdle of royal linen. And the king gave command that they should bury Nefer-Ktar with honor due to the son of a king, and that the Book of Thoth should be buried with him. Thus was the vengeance of Thoth fulfilled, but the book remained with Nefer-Ktar. Thank you very much for listening. Part 1 out of 3, I think, for this short series on the ancient Egyptian legends. I will thank my top-tier supporters and patrons. It's Dark, Kerry, Kimberly, Ember, Ben, Britt, Charles, Aaron, James, Jeffrey, Melissa, Scott, Stark Factory, Wendy, Jaden, Sherry, Jessica, Christine, Sally, Katiana, Christine, Fizabo, Legitmus, Maverick, Susan, and Dr. Neuronerd. Thank you very much. And as is tradition, I wish you all the best. Lots of love to each and every one of you. And I will see you next time. Don't forget to like and subscribe, or else Thoth is gonna come and get you. Good night. See you next time.